China has agreed to invest in Pakistan's energy sector. President Asif Zardari is in Beijing at the beginning of a week-long visit. And with that deal and rumours of further nuclear agreements in the offing, US influence over Pakistan appears to be waning. Well, for more, we're now joined by Dr. Anatol Lieven from King's College in London. Dr. Lieven, many thanks for joining us. So Pakistan is strengthening ties with China. Why is it seeking a major partner other than the US, do you think?
China and Pakistan have been partners for 40 years now, more than 40 years. Initially, this was motivated above all by mutual hostility to India. Now, in addition, China has a very strong interest in Pakistan as a future energy route from the Persian Gulf to China. So this isn't new. The nuclear element is new, and this is very much a response to America's nuclear deal with India. Because, of course, it's pretty ironic that the United States is now saying that China is threatening the NPT and so forth, because it was America's deal with India which really, well, on top, of course, of America's relations with Israel, which shattered the NPT in that part of the world.
Now, you've mentioned the nuclear deal struck between the US and India some 2 years ago, and China is expected to build 2 nuclear power plants, we now know, in Pakistan. Why else do you think is Washington's reaction to that deal so negative?
Well, it's two things. It's partly, of course, that yes, there is rivalry for interest, for influence in Pakistan between Beijing and Washington. But it's also, of course, that the United States is very worried about the spread of nuclear energy and nuclear technology in the Muslim world, and especially, of course, in Pakistan, for fear that this might fall into the hands of terrorists. Now, this threat, in my view, is greatly exaggerated. Pakistan is not nearly as weak a state as most Americans believe, but nonetheless they do believe that there is this threat, and they therefore see Pakistan in a quite different category from India.
Well, in that, Pakistan has recently had military drills with China. So what kind of strategic partnership do you think ties them?
Well, as I say, it's partly that they both are hostile to India, more or less. And Pakistan looks to China for support against India. China looks to Pakistan for balancing against India. But it's also increasingly that China is very worried that its growing economy is far too dependent on seaborne energy routes from the Persian Gulf, and that in any future conflict, the Indian Navy would find it very easy to block those sea routes across the Indian Ocean. And so China has been looking at a variety of different overland routes for energy from the Persian Gulf to flow to China. And one of those possibilities, well, actually it's becoming a reality, is to build an oil and gas pipeline across Pakistan along the line of the existing Karakoram highway across the Himalayas to Chinese Tibet and then on to the heartland of China. So this is the other great Chinese interest there. What China has not yet formulated, I think, or has certainly not expressed, is a clear policy towards the Afghan Taliban and towards the future of Afghanistan. This is something in which, of course, Pakistan plays a very important role. The Chinese are hostile to the Taliban, obviously, as a Muslim radical force, but they haven't as yet allowed this to have any impact on their relations with Pakistan. And a key question is where China's fear of the Taliban will lead them in future.
Now, a survey conducted in Pakistan by the Pew Research Centre recently suggested that only some 16% of respondents had a favourable view of the United States. Do you think that Pakistani politicians would provide similar results?
At heart, to a considerable extent, yes. But there are two very important factors at work. The first is that a much higher proportion of Pakistani politicians coming from the elites tend to be westernized, and they have children in universities in America. They rely on America to support them against Islamist radicals at home. The other important thing is that up to now, the Pakistani military has been chiefly, in fact overwhelmingly reliant on the United States for military assistance and for arms sales. Now, with the growth of the Chinese high-tech economy and defence sector, that could be beginning to change. And that could be of crucial importance. If the Pakistani military felt that they no longer needed the Americans and could rely on the Chinese instead, if, for that matter, the Pakistani elites felt that the Chinese could provide economic aid to compensate for American aid, well, that could lead to a really radical Pakistani swing away from the United States.
Okay,
but that hasn't happened yet.
Dr. Anatol Levin, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but many thanks. That was Dr. Levin from King's College in London speaking to us.